Good morning on this beautiful Sunday in April with gorgeous blooms everywhere and many runny noses and many watery eyes. We are so glad that you've joined us today. I'm Martha Sinkula, your service leader. I welcome you to the Umpqua Unitarian Universalist congregation. I really miss seeing all of you out here in the congregation, in the sanctuary. And as more and more of us become fully vaccinated, we can look ahead to opening our congregation. But in the meantime, take a moment to check in with each other. Our speaker this week is Reverend Dennis Reynolds, and he will be available for an after-sermon Zoom discussion. Every Sunday check-in begins at 11:15 with conversation at 11:30. And if you want to participate in our after-service Zoom discussions and you haven't used it, call our office to ask for someone to assist you. And if you miss the after-service discussion, they are recorded. So like our services, you can view them anytime on YouTube. Services are generally uploaded on Saturday nights. And in addition, we have services and discussions. We also have meditations and interviews. So there's a lot to check out. We always thank Michael Wheeler and Lucy Swangham for their work on producing these videos of our services each week. Well done, guys. Thank you. Our chalice lighting words this morning are by Leslie Pohl Kosbau. Flame of fire, spark of the universe that warmed our ancestral hearth, agent of life and death, symbol of truth and freedom, we strive to understand ourselves and our earthly home.
We'd like to share a reading this morning from the Reverend Kenneth Patton, and we'd like you to read it with us. We invite you, as you choose, to read either the regular text with me or the italics with Martha. Let us worship with our eyes and ears and fingertips.
Let us love the world through heart and mind and body.
We feed our eyes upon the mystery and revelation in the faces of our brothers and sisters, all our siblings.
We seek to know the wistfulness of the very young and the very old, the wistfulness of people in all times of life.
We seek to understand the shyness behind arrogance, the fear behind pride, the tenderness behind clumsy strength, the anguish behind cruelty.
All the life flows into a great common life if we will only open our eyes to our companions.
Let us worship, not in bowing down, not with closed eyes and stopped ears.
Let us worship with the opening of all the windows of our beings, with the full outstretching of our spirits.
Life comes with singing and laughter, with tears and confiding, with a rising wave too great to be held in the mind and heart and body, to those who have fallen in love with life.
Let us worship, and let us learn to love.
This is a season of celebrations. Just last week was Easter, the week before was Passover, and shortly before that was the spring equinox. The roadsides are splashed with yellow daffodils. Many trees have become puff pastels. Subtly different hues of green surround us. It's a season of resurrection, liberation, and rebirth. It's also the time for the planting of new seed. Vaccinations and immunities are beginning to offer renewal in our own lives. I invite you now into a time of shared silence to ponder with intention what it is you would seek liberation from. What do you wish to resurrect, to refresh, to plant anew? Let's do this in a movement meditation. We've done forms of this together. So hands open to receive whatever this season brings to you. And breathing in, I am renewed, and hold it to my heart. And then breathing out, we discard that which limits us. So again, hands open, bring in freshness and potential, hold it a moment, and let it go so we can let go of staleness. Open. Bring it in, hold, and let it go. Open. Receive. Hold. One last cleansing breath in deeply and out.
Our reading is from Ralph Waldo Emerson. A person will worship something, have no doubt about that. We may think our tribute is paid in secret in the dark recesses of our hearts, but it will come out. That which dominates our imaginations and our thoughts will determine our lives and our character. Therefore, it behooves us to be careful what we worship. For what we are worshiping, we are becoming. Reverend Dennis Reynolds came to the ministry after a 30-year career as a preschool teacher and an administrator at the University of Oregon. He has since retired to Eugene after serving churches in Oregon and Washington State and as hospital chaplain. He has been an activist both locally and globally. Reverend Dennis believes the most powerful sermons are often those written with a religious text in one hand and a current news source in the other. He enjoys lifelong learning and the practice of crafting sermons. Our congregation enjoys his wisdom and his wit and his ability to share his authentic self with us. Dennis?
When I shared the title of my proposed sermon for this month, I was asked about my punctuation choice for the phrase, "what we worship." I affirmed that I indeed wanted to use a question mark. What we worship, as a question rather than as an affirmative statement. For questioning is at the core of who we are as Unitarian Universalist. It is noted in one of our hymns, we come to believe that to question truly is an answer. There's some who have suggested that perhaps a question mark is a more apt symbol for our faith tradition than is the flaming chalice. Such a questioning approach is central to what we do individually and collectively. Individually, it is formalized as our fourth principle in a covenant to affirm and promote a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Collectively, it's expressed in our commitment to being and remaining a living tradition. A living tradition. This is the time, if we were together in church this morning, I would ask you to take out your hymnal, pick it up, and read the title. Here it is, Singing the Living Tradition. We are a living tradition. Through study and contemplation, discussion and explorations, we question and we strive to be open to change, individually and collectively. We are in the business of change, deep change, transformation. The vision statement of my home church in Eugene reads, "Empowered by love, we transform ourselves and serve the world." The questions we ask include explorations of what we honor, what we hold as ultimate and worthy, and what we worship. We honor our history as we question it. Today I want to look at a time of change and a change agent in our Unitarian history. I also want to explore some changes that are taking place in our time, both within Unitarian Universalism and in the larger culture in which we live our lives. That historic shaper of our tradition is Ralph Waldo Emerson. Emerson was a profoundly important voice in our tradition. Some have identified him as the father of modern Unitarianism, and his influence in shaping who we were becoming in the 19th century and who we are now was profound. We rightly hold him in high esteem and boast of his links to us in his service as a Unitarian Universalist minister and as a shaper of Unitarian and American philosophy and theology. As many of you are aware, Ralph Waldo and his friend Henry David Thoreau, I'm not quite sure what those guys had with the multiple names, but anyway, Ralph Waldo and Henry David, along with the publisher and writer Margaret Fuller, were important voices in the shaping of American thought through the articulation of a philosophy that came to be known as Transcendentalism. We like to trumpet their Unitarian connections. Fuller, though, it seems, was just a sometimes Unitarian attendee. Emerson and Thoreau, though, we proudly claim as ours. They were not, however, as strong as Unitarians as we sometimes claim them to be. Both were, for much of their lives, more former Unitarians than participants in our faith. Henry David reportedly resigned his membership in the Concord Church at the age of 17. Not unlike a lot of our UU youth in more recent times, it seems. He continued to be a regular attendee at what I call the Church of the Woodlands. Ralph Waldo was a preacher's kid, and after his studies at Harvard, secured a position as minister to the Second Church in Boston. He left there midway through his third year, in what might now be described as less than the best of circumstances. In our current system, would have likely been called a negotiated resignation. An essay in the online Harvard Square Library describes it. The avowed cause of Emerson's leaving the Second Church pulpit was not the real cause. The real cause was the inevitable conflict between formalism and freedom. The avowed cause was a difference of opinion as to how the Lord's Supper would be celebrated. Strange, said Emerson in later years, that the same people would gladly hear and accept certain truths when delivered from the lecture platform, which they will not tolerate from the pulpit. I thought to carry them, this congregation, with me. Back in 1832, Emerson, in a sermon that was later published in an essay, said, "The office of this age is to put the Bible, the Hindu Upanishads, the maxims of pagan philosophers on the eternal footing of equality of origin in the instincts of the human mind." Such a call for a faith drawing from many sources, and his concurrent affirmations of what many now call religious naturalism, was not met with welcome within much of the establishment of 19th century Unitarianism. Now, many of the young and up-and-coming voices in the faith were enlightened and inspired by his essays, most particularly the essay Nature, published in 1836. In 1838, the graduating students at Harvard invited him to offer what has come to be known as the Divinity School Address. Now, when I first visited Meadville Lombard Theological School, which is where I attended seminary, I sat in on a class on Unitarian Universalist history, and the topic that day was the discussion of the Divinity School Address. At one of my very last classes I took at Meadville, we again discussed the Divinity School Address. I still find it moving to read it. It begins with a poetic affirmation of natural beauty on this refulgent summer day, and then goes on to describe the beauty of that day. It continues as a call for change. Its impact on our faith is enormous, and yet at the time of the delivery, it was widely criticized, especially by the relatively conservative clergy of the time, who felt it was anti-Christian and overly critical of the church, and too positive about the mystical. The noted Henry Ware, an important Unitarian of the time, said in a letter to Ralph Waldo, "I must confess with regard to some of your views that they appear to me more than doubtful. Their prevalence would tend to overthrow the authority and influence of Christianity. On this account, I look with anxiety to the course which your mind has been taking." Harvard faculty member Andrew Norton wrote in response to the address a lecture titled "The Latest Form of Idolatry." The latest form of infidelity, he said, is distinguished by assuming the Christian name while it strikes directly at the root of faith in Christianity and indirectly at all religion. Nothing is last that can be called Christianity if its miraculous character be denied, its essence is gone, its evidence is annihilated. Meanwhile, many of the younger clergy and clergy-to-be who were in attendance that day were thrilled and inspired by what they heard. And then young Theodore Parker wrote in his journal that night, "So beautiful, so just, so true, and terribly sublime was this picture of the faults of the church in its present position. My soul is roused." Emerson's criticisms were not limited to the church. He said of the larger society, "We live in a transition period when the old faiths which comforted nations, and not only so, but made nations, seem to have spent their force. I do not find the religions of men at this moment very credible to them. The fatal trait is the divorce between religion and morality. Idolatries wherein the whiteness of ritual cover scarlet indulgences." He said, "There is no faith in the intellectual, none in the moral universe. There is faith in chemistry, in meat, in wine, in wealth, in machinery, in the steam engine, galvanic batteries, turbine wheels, sewing machines, and in public opinion, but not in divine causes. A silent revolution has loosed the tensions of the old religious sects, and in place of the gravity and permanence of those societies of opinion, they run into freak and extravagance." That was then. Though I have to say, for me, much of what Emerson reported seems similar to what we see in our times. In our time, there is a divisiveness within our faith once more. There has been no single orator like an Emerson or pivotal transformative address like that delivered to the Harvard graduates of 1838, but change has been taking place within our living tradition. Calls for radical inclusion and deconstruction of white supremacy within our movement have in some settings created disharmony. Following the public emergence of such concerns in 2017, we saw the resignation of then UNU Association President Peter Morales. Don Southworth, then Executive Director of the Unitarian Universalist Ministerial Association, the UUMA, after conflict with his board, also resigned. Seeking greater understandings of the issues, many congregations participated in white supremacy teach-ins as Sunday services. Many other Sundays have seen pulpit explorations of the issues, and there have been lots of book groups and other spaces for focused questioning. Many of us were called out as part of a problem, and in time, many of us were called back into covenant within a movement that was changing and growing, theologically and in how we manifest our values in the world. The 2017 General Assembly was a time of questioning and a time of healing, as many of us who had been leading sheltered lives of privilege began to hear and began to understand. I watched as many who attended that GA and the many focused gatherings that have followed have become part of what has sometimes been called a journey toward wholeness. There has also been some pushback from some who would be very surprised to be labeled conservatives. Some have seen this new direction or movement as a Boston-centered, top-down imposition of values that they see as nearly creedal, belief which all are expected to adopt. At the end of General Assembly in 2019 in Spokane, the controversy peaked when publicly shared comments were deemed hurtful by UU people of color and others. Attempts to reconcile differing viewpoints were unsuccessful. The UUMA board censored a beloved colleague. In the months that followed, a group of clergy has opposed this and other actions of the UUA and the UUMA. 13 ministers tendered their resignation from the Ministers Association, and 10 more affirmed that position. Most were ministers with decades of service, and several are colleagues with whom I share a deep friendship. It has been a difficult time within Unitarian Universalism, and it has been an exciting time filled with new possibilities for individual and shared growth and transformation. Personally, as a white, cisgendered, heterosexual male, I have been doing the often uncomfortable work of deeply understanding my place within larger systems of oppression and determining how I might move myself out of the cultural center without leaving the room. Meanwhile, many who had historically felt marginalized by gender identity and sexual orientation, ability or disability, ethnicity, race, or culture have finally felt heard. Over the past year, pandemic-based separations have resulted in too many social media-based debates and too few opportunities to sit together and seek true community and reconciliation. It has been a challenging time in Unitarian Universalism and a time filled with the seeds of transformation. Meanwhile, all around us, commitments to religious faith has continued to decline in America. We UUs have been mostly sort of flatline in terms of total numbers, yet our neighbors down the street in the mainline Protestant churches have seen significant drops in members. Even the evangelical Christian churches, which for decades had seen significant growth in membership and influence, have had divisive issues surface and seen some splintering and declines in membership. What and how we Americans lift up through personal and through collective corporate worship what we hold most deeply in our beliefs is shifting. The righty Shadi Hamid, in an article titled America Without God, offers a question. As religious faith has declined, ideological intensity has risen. Will the quest for secular redemption through politics doom the American idea? He writes, as Christianity's hold in particular has weakened, ideological intensity and fragmentation has risen. American faith, it turns out, is as fervent as ever. It's just that what was once religious belief has now been channeled into political belief. Political debates over what America is supposed to mean have taken on the character of theological disputation. That is what religion without religion looks like. He lifts up the Catholic philosopher Michael Novick's notion that America itself is almost a religion. Hamid continues, the American civic religion has its own founding myths, its prophets and processions, as well as scripture. The Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Federalist Papers. In his famous I Have a Dream speech, Martin Luther King Jr. wished that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. The very idea that a nation might have a creed, a word associated primarily with religions, illustrates the uniqueness of American identity as well as its predicament. He reminds us that deeply felt connections as sublimated religion is not new. Theologian and statesman Abraham Kuyper argued that all strongly held ideologies were effectively faith-based and that no human being could survive long without some ultimate loyalty. If that loyalty didn't derive from traditional religion, it would find expression through secular commitments such as nationalism, socialism, or liberalism. The political theorist Samuel Goldman calls this the law of conservation of religion. He wrote, in any given society, there is a relatively constant and finite supply of religious conviction. What varies is how and where it is expressed. it seems a person will worship something. Notions of what it means to live out the American creed are no longer deeply rooted in white Protestant, dare I say, white supremacy culture. Understandings of Americans' deepest values have become richer and more diverse, but also more contentious. Extremes have become more extreme. Accusations and counter-accusations abound. It's not unlike what Emerson witnessed in the 19th century when he wrote, "A silent revolution has loosed the tensions of the old religious sects." So what now? What now? This is certainly a central question of our time, both within Unitarian Universalism and as we seek a shared vision for America. The political philosopher Samuel Cabral tells us, some days are for dealing with insurance documents or fighting in the mud with your political opponents. But there are also days for solemnity, for fasting, or worship, or feasting, things that remind us that the world is bigger than itself. Things that remind us that the world is bigger than itself. This is what leads us to faith. Faith in goodness and faith in our own capacity to make a difference. Our Unitarian Universalist faith can offer us space and time for such deep ponderings and questioning, and for believing and for worshiping. I want to close today with the words of the 20th century Unitarian and Unitarian Universalist theologian James Luther Adams. A living tradition is not bequeathed to us through some law of inheritance. It must be earned, not without dust and heat, and not without humbling grace. May it be so. Our closing words of benediction are yet one more gift from Ralph Waldo Emerson. What lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us. Amen, and blessed be.